I am Bill Landefeld, and I'm going to be introducing us to our speaker today, which is Robin Manherz. Robin is currently a C-level executive for SAP, one of the world's leading producers of software for the management of business processes. Robin has over 25 years of proven results globally in business and technology. At SAP, Robin serves as SAP's Executive VP and Chief Operating Officer for Customer Success, which spans across sales, service, and customer engagement in different functions worldwide. In this role, she displays leadership in building transformative change and measurable business outcomes in highly complex environments at unprecedented speed, while building and leading diverse teams across the globe in both growing and mature markets. Outside of SAP, Robin is a speaker, mentor, and published on topics related to enterprise software, digital transformation, leadership, and DE&I. In addition to being a business leader, Robin is the mother of 6 kids, 4 of whom were adopted from Haiti. As such, she's an ardent advocate for adoptive families and at-risk children, and speaks with potential adoptive families regarding her personal experience with adoption, with international adoption. In her life and in her career, Robin is passionate about creating inclusive spaces and using her leadership to make a valuable impact in the world. Robin, welcome.
What an introduction. Thank you for that. And I also am a 1993 graduate. I consider among the most valued accomplishments.
Go Yellow Jackets.
Indeed.
So Robin, before we get into some specific questions, I just wanted to ask if you could give us a bit of a tour from the time of your life, from graduating from tech to becoming the COO of customer success at SAP. Just if you could highlight some of the key lessons and maybe something you would tell your 20-year-old self.
Sure. Personally speaking, since I graduated, 8 months after graduation, and we're still married today. And as you mentioned, I have 6 children, 4 adopted from Haiti. I moved to Colorado and back to Georgia twice. I now live in Jacksonville, Florida, but also have a home in Georgia. And I've had the opportunity to travel all over the world. So it's been a journey personally. My professional highlights, out of tech, I got my first job, and I landed a great job that I was with for 11 years, and that was with a company called J.D. Edwards. And I joined at the real upturn of the ERP software industry, and I was hired as a college hire to focus on post-sales consulting and training. But I did whatever I was asked to do. I made coffee, I did the reception desk, and really embraced just the opportunity to have the role, and so much, so much I was able to do there. And in 11 years' time, J.D. Edwards was acquired by a company called PeopleSoft, which was subsequently acquired by Oracle. But that 11 years, I had a tremendous opportunity to work in a wide variety of jobs. And then I did 2 short stops in between. I ran marketing in a small startup company, and then I did business development in another smaller enterprise software company before I joined SAP, which is 15 years ago now. And as you said, Bill, just stats on that, SAP runs about 28 billion euro of revenue annually. We have over 100,000 people in 140 countries and more than 400 customers. So 15 years at SAP has given me a great opportunity to see a heck of a lot of things. And I started by providing sales support to mid-sized customers in the process industry sector. But since then, I've done about everything you can do in a software company, except I have not coded software. I'm not a programmer, but I've worked in sales, I've worked in finance, operations, corporate development. I worked directly for our CEO for 3 years, but today, as you said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for sales, service, and customer functions worldwide for SAP. And the team that I lead is about 1,300 colleagues across 59 countries, and a couple of things I'm particularly proud of. 7% of my team is early talent. That means people who are less than 30 years old. And wait for it, 59% are women and 41% are men. So I take great pride in the diversity of the team that I lead. And also, just continuing on the journey, about a month ago, I was appointed to the board of directors at Advantage Solutions, which is a $4 billion company that serves retailers, professional services for retailers. So that's my first appointment to an executive board, and I'm really looking forward to what that's gonna look like. And I've had a exciting career journey that's been just full of twists and turns, and my 20-year-old self definitely had no idea what was in store, that is for sure. I go back and I look at who I was when I graduated. I was very focused on minimizing risk. I tried to control everything so that I knew what the outcome was going to be. I was more inclined to look for the safe route and, was really risk averse. And frankly, I struggled with anxiety. I worried a lot about what was going to happen. I studied. I graduated with a 4.0 because I was so fixated on controlling my circumstances. And as you've heard from what life has handed me, both from a personal and professional perspective, I just deal with now with incredible amounts of uncertainty and stress. And I've dealt with things that I never thought that I could. So if I thought about what would I tell myself, one is expect the unexpected. We've all learned that in the past couple of years if we didn't know it before. Trust in yourself and always keep it real. Be authentic, because at the end of the day, that's what you've got, is who you are and what you stand for. Never compromise yourself. Be willing to take risks. And for me, that's something that's really developed over time. But know your core values and what you really care about most, and let that guide you. Really know yourself, know what you care about, and don't worry too much about finding the perfect position or the perfect circumstance, because things are rarely going to be what you thought they were going to be anyway. And just know yourself, know what you care about, and you'll be able to figure it out. Trust in yourself and go for it. Take some risks and have some fun along the way. That's probably that's me in a nutshell. Past 30 years.
And over your career, it seems like you've really managed to work through a lot of that anxiety of trying to control everything that is in your path, taking on risks, being able to be flexible in uncomfortable situations. How did you make that transition over time? Because a lot of us are looking at our future careers and in the stage of kind of worrying about what's going to be next.
Yeah.
Could you talk me through that?
It really is a journey. It really is a process of that I think, as I mentioned, is most notably having a lot of self-awareness. Focus on what you can control. You can't control the circumstances around you. You can't control oftentimes how people are going to react or respond or what they're going to think. Focus on what are your controllable variables that as I mentioned, that what you want, that you understand, you take time to really understand what is most important to you. Seek out, people that have attributes that appeal to you, that support you, that calm you, and know that the best laid plans are never the way things turn out. So, and this will go with something you might ask me later. I think one of the reasons that I had been frankly exposed to not much diversity up to when I was 20 years old. I lived in the same neighborhood in a suburb of Atlanta with very predictable circumstances. The more diversity I put in my life, moved to Colorado, adopted children with special needs, adopted children of a different race with special needs. As you introduce more diversity in your life, you start to realize, that that success looks different in so many ways, and that there are so many different paths to explore. that there are so many different experiences out there. And so probably, I didn't prepare this answer before, and it was a great question, that I think that is probably when I started to, as I introduced more diversity, as I understood more about different human experiences, I was much less afraid of what might happen. Because frankly, I was dealt a lot of things that I thought I could never handle. And each time I did, and every time you do, every time you knock down and overcome something professionally or personally that you thought you couldn't do, you become that much more confident. So I hope that helps. I mean, I think in a nutshell that if I had to say something pragmatic, those are a few tips I would pass on. And also, embrace your anxiety. I mean, acknowledge this is something I need. This is something I struggle with. Being too, I need to take care of myself. So also, be willing to embrace and acknowledge, I'm way more stressed out than I should be. I need to find tools to equip myself, to take care of myself.
So in looking over that and how, increasing your diversity of location, of different people you're working with, and it seems like you've got a large share of, for example, women in the workplace. I was wondering if you could talk to me about how that has changed along your career path, if there's been an intentional, say, move to get different people into different positions, and just kind of about how you've taken what you've learned in your own diversity in your life and how you've applied that as a business leader.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As we mentioned, I've been in the workplace for 30 years, and I have seen major changes that have occurred in the workplace with regards to the empirical recognition that diversity yields better business outcomes. So we've collected a body, there's now enough, body of evidence, empirical evidence that when you have diversity of thought and diverse people participating in decision making, it yields better outcomes. So, practically speaking, from my point of view, when I think about diversity and how to scale it within an organization, I do think in terms, first line, in terms of cognitive diversity. And in that sense, I mean, people coming to the table with different life experiences. Whatever it is, from a diversity perspective that makes you come to the boardroom table with a different body of experience to contribute. So I'm always very, very purposeful about, I don't want, I want people who come, people who may have have a different type of professional background than a typical candidate, who bring gender diversity, as we've talked about, of course, ethnic diversity, but also just different experiences. We have an autism at work focus, so different types of cognitive capabilities that you bring to the table. But people with a military background. I'm really excited now about, we've launched getting women back to work, kind of in the post-COVID, some women who had to leave the workplace and are wanting to ease back in. So, I think there's been, I think the kind of the push for diversity started with very KPI based. How many women do we have in the workforce? How many women do we have in management? How many women do we have in expert roles? And that's very important, and we measure that. But I think the real richness, the real tapestry of it comes in when you think more totality of diverse thought. And I mean, just take, for instance, you're in meetings, I'm in 100, if not thousands of, tens of thousands of meetings. And you go into a meeting, everybody is basically the same, similar background, same gender, approximately the same age. Those meetings tend to be kind of dull, oftentimes an echo chamber where we just affirm each other and walk out and, we're no better for it. And then I think about meetings where we brought in people that were very dissimilar, and just think of the dynamics of those meetings. They're more participatory, they're more interesting, they're more exciting, they're more fun. And now we have empirical evidence that that you yield better outcomes, and you can see that decisions and teams that are more diverse produce higher productivity levels overall. So I try to talk, you can ask, maybe hone in on places that you're interested in, but there's certainly just a level of awareness and purposeful intent in the workplace now to embrace diversity. We've gone beyond KPIs focused on purely, gender metrics to a much broader focus on cognitive diversity overall. And I'll tell you this, I often say the best thing that the most unique trait that I bring to the table is my working mother of six, and I bring that unapologetically to the boardroom table. You want to know what I really think, and you want to know what our customers really think? Well, our customers are just people with experiences, and that's what we owe to the corporation.
And so, I'm imagining you in that board meeting, mother of six, maybe you got to run and do something. How have you taken, kind of this part of your life being a mother, and how has that influenced you as a business leader in the decisions you're making, or maybe how you, may set boundaries or think about things in a little bit different way than maybe other people?
I will tell you, as long as I've worked at SAP, I have worked virtually. So I was I would say, somewhat of a pioneer, and SAP was as well, in that I have lived in the same place and had physical offices in Philadelphia. I had a physical office in Waldorf, Germany, all while living in Denver, Colorado, Florida. So I have been somewhat, kind of an early pioneer in terms of working virtually, proving that it can be successful. And during those times, oftentimes I reported to someone who lived in a different country. I had teams of people who lived in different countries. And so I've learned a lot about, how to work virtually and get the flexibility that you need for that while still being, yielding productive teams. And that means, stylistic ways of setting up your team and your organization. We do things like virtual water coolers, where we simulate the water cooler experience with just everybody get online and let's just chat. And so that's one piece that being able to work virtually has been essential for me. There is no way that I would have been able to pull off what I have. And I'm very pleased that post-COVID SAP has made a pledge, and this is kind of emblematic of the workforce, has made a pledge to flex permanently. So I think one of the things that came from the pandemic that I think is going to serve the business world very well is virtual working. And I think it's going to cause people with diverse backgrounds, with various family circumstances, to be able to do things that they couldn't do before. Another thing I'll tell you that I was a pioneer, that was a pioneer, is my husband became a stay-at-home dad before it was cool and in vogue. So after my first son was born in 2000, my husband and I both had careers, and we had our son in daycare for about a year and said, we don't want to do this. And I pass no judgment whatsoever on people for whom that works. But for us, we decided we wanted one of us to stay home, and we basically did a pro-con list of who had the attributes best suited to be a stay-at-home parent versus a professional. And my husband's traits were more conducive to stay-at-home parent. So in 2002, so that was some 20 years ago, my husband became a stay-at-home dad. And he is a hero in my story. And he's an overachiever, hence our 6 kids. But that's another pragmatic way. And third, I'll tell you something. My job has required me to travel. It's required sacrifices from my family. But what we always say is, this is our job. I do a part, we all do a part. My part is I go to work and, get on the airplane or whatnot, but the whole family is contributing, because people are, being without me for a period of time or having to be quiet while we're on a virtual call. But everybody feels like this is our job. We do this job together. This is the way that we make income for our family, and we do it all together by everybody playing their part. So that's some of what we've leveraged that are probably atypical things that you hear about how to manage a career perspective.
And so being a mother of six, being virtual before it was cool, how do you think that you've built up these strengths as a leader, and especially in the unprecedented times of COVID, we're seeing lots of people switching over to virtual. Have you been able to take any of those experiences and really push it through SAP in terms of helping set the direction moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, just all of this, it again comes back, I think, to kind of the collection of things that you experience along the way. I have, so many things that I've experienced personally have informed my journey professionally. I think that I have learned a lot about myself and what my affinities are. And so, the job that I have now running as the Chief Operating Officer for the whole front office of SAP, it's like running a very complex machine. It's almost a feat of engineering, a company with this many people operating in this many places with this broad of a portfolio. And I touch so many things. Like if we're just thinking about today, first, this different things I've done over the course of today in my job. I have reviewed the integration status of a company that we recently acquired. That was meeting number one. Meeting number two, we looked at the discount trends on one of our new product lines, and do we need to change our price point? Then I prepared for our next year 2022 financial and operating plan for a board meeting this weekend. I had a meeting on diversity and inclusion where we looked at some of the KPIs, and then I changed over to a whole other discussion. I'm just thinking about, I might have 20 different topics on my calendar a day. So how do I relate that back? I have learned a lot about being able to multitask, manage many different things. And that's by virtue of being virtual and also being a working mom, 6 kids, being able to manage a lot, being able to keep a lot of different streams going at once. That's a very practical experience that I've applied. Another, as I mentioned, is this much amped up level of empathy that I have because of the life experiences that I've had. I would never ever pass judgment on anyone's position, because I know anything can happen to anybody at any time. And I think as COO and bringing that level of empathy into all of those technical topics that I just mentioned, that's differentiating and has, allowed me, I think, to separate myself to some extent. And, as I mentioned also, this being able to develop a level of risk tolerance of dealing with the uncertainty that my personal experiences have made me better at and made me more resilient. And that resiliency is something that's very important to bring to organizations. That I can absorb the shock waves and still be able to continue to stay focused on the outcomes and the customers that we serve. So in an interesting way, all of that has led me to take a lot of risks in my career, to be able to, probably bring a more human dimension oftentimes to roles or jobs that people may have held back more from an authenticity perspective. And I really think that it's allowed me to, at this phase of my life, be able to be really well positioned to serve a company of the size and scope of SAP in a holistic way, not just because I've mastered empirical skills, but also life skills and other attributes that I've developed over time.
So kind of touching on that, if we're looking at some leaders, maybe some MBA students, and if you were to share any insights into how you've been able to create kind of that environment of psychological safety where people can bring their authentic self to the workforce, like how would you recommend that they create that in their groups and teams that they may be leading?
Yeah, psychological safety is certainly something that as we've mentioned before, we talk about in a much more open way than we once did. So number one is that, putting the topic out there and acknowledging it is something that 30 years ago when I entered the workforce, there was just no room for that. It was all, you never ever wanted to show any cracks in the armor. And now, so I think psychological safety has a lot to do with this topic of authenticity and celebrating the cracks in the armor. And I encourage and expect every leader that I have to model this authenticity that I described to you. So authentic self without repercussions. As we've said, I often see that some of my personal attributes make me most qualified, and I'm completely unapologetic about that. So I've always supported people in bringing everything they have and doing it unapologetically. I mean, doing it purposefully. And so some of the things that I've done, practically speaking, in organizations that I lead, I certainly establish an expectation of culture. So we do our mission statement, we do our objectives, we do our goals and our KPIs without question. But I also outline very specific cultural tenets. And openness and inclusivity and the fact that differences should be embraced, not criticized, overlooked, or ignored is a key part of that. And in fact, what I've recently done in a couple of teams that I've led is we do a quarterly recognition award, and we base it on people who have demonstrated those cultural tenets. So we ask for nominations. Tell me, and we celebrate not who got the highest quota achievement or who produced, the best business case. There's places we do that, but we call out a very special recognition for having demonstrably shown those attributes of the culture. Another thing, practically speaking, is make sure that people are rewarded for speaking up and for taking risks. We often talk about, and I think the technology industry has been good about this, that, what you want to do is take risks and fail early and fail often, because you learn from those risks. One of my favorite quotes from a Bill Gates quote is that success is a lousy teacher. You don't learn very much from, and in fact, you can be lulled into a false sense of comfort if you don't hit some failures along the way. So we do things to purposefully celebrate risk-taking and celebrate that we failed fast, and what can we learn from that, and how do we take that failure and put it into the next iteration of ideas. One thing that I'll call out that I think is difficult about psychological safety, especially in really high-performing environments, is trying to be deliberate about leading an organization where people are not competing with each other, they're supporting each other. And this is something that especially as I mentioned, you move up the ranks in high-performance cultures, people are trying to differentiate themselves. They are trying to look good and get ahead. And you really have to be purposeful in an organization, and as a leader, it is super important to help people embrace their personal development paths based on what they have done and accomplished, and not based on diminishing the contributions of other people. And this is subtle. People don't go out and try to blast down this is where you start to see passive aggressive things. You start to see people not sharing information with colleagues, taking credit for someone else's work. I think those are places where people start to feel psychologically unsafe, if they feel like their team members are competing with them versus collaborating with them. So I think from a managerial perspective, it's very important to be deliberate about that how can you accomplish your goals while your colleagues accomplish them as well? and not one at the expense of the other. So those are some practical things that I use from a psychological safety perspective.
Awesome. And to shift gears a little bit, in the last 2 years, it's been a very crazy time in the United States across the board. It's also been very pivotal for our collective awareness around social and racial justice, or the lack thereof. And I'm curious if you have an opinion on the role that businesses play in addressing social and racial injustices.
I mean, I think all businesses have a responsibility based on what the charter, the sector of the community that they serve. Certainly at SAP, I feel and we feel that we have a very important responsibility here. SAP has the tagline and mission statement to make the world run better. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about working for SAP is there's not many companies that could say that and have it be like literally possible. Almost every large enterprise in the world runs their business or a large portion of their business on SAP technology. We exist in, as I mentioned, hundreds of countries. So the platform that we have we in my view, and I know in the view of our executive supervisory board, is we certainly have a responsibility. And for us as people and individuals, and for me, when we talk about getting fulfillment and purpose out of life, if you're just going and checking into a job and delivering a line of code, then what fulfillment really is there? I think there is a greater purpose that all of us have by virtue of where we work and the platforms that are available to us. So the answer is yes, and SAP has purposely focused on connecting the experience of, in particular, people of color and reaffirming our commitment to diversity. Several things that we've done, we've tried to do very practical things. We introduced I think this is really cool, a program called Spotlight Black Businesses. And this is where executives and business people at SAP have been able to sign up to specifically assist Black-owned businesses that have been impacted by COVID and social unrest and otherwise. And we've contributed, matching up people to contribute time to really support those businesses. What we call social sabbaticals, that someone can literally sign up to go and serve as a member of that team to help bring those businesses along. We did the Stop Hate for Profit effort. That was, we suspended all of our paid advertisements on social media until we saw, effort to combat hate speech. So, we've taken literally, and I think in the technology industry in particular, our platform is such that there is absolutely a responsibility. There is a unique capability to make a difference in a very real, tangible way. And for me, I think a very important part of motivating anybody at work is purpose. I'm very, very, I often use the analogy, there's three people digging in the dirt, and or digging up rocks, and you ask one, what are you doing? And they say, I'm doing whatever anybody tells me to do for the next 8 hours. The next person says, I'm digging rocks. Third person says, I'm making a cathedral, because those rocks are going to be built in that cathedral. Well, the outcome, the person who's building the cathedral is obviously far more inspired and living a much richer experience than the person who's just on the clock to do whatever they're told or focus on the task at hand. So I think it's universally in service to the society, the company, and us that we yield our platforms for purposes of importance, like the grave importance that we have in addressing social and racial unrest, particularly in the United States.
Awesome. And just to switch gears a little bit as well, but, given that purpose is a very important part of, how you view your work at SAP, how do you help cultivate that sense of purpose in your teams and as a leader at SAP?
Well, as I mentioned, that analogy that I just told you is one that I've used frequently with people, and really, I mean, I do it in very purposeful ways, and have done a number of different, I could do a whole thesis on the absolute utter importance of, and it loops back to what we said earlier, encouraging people to be self-aware, encouraging people who work for me and people who work for me who have others who work for them, any team that I lead, any project that I undertake, that you understand what you care about, what your purposes are, what you really, what really is it that you that drives you, and understand that about the people that work for you or that are working with you on a project, and be very purposeful, even at the individual level. We're going to do something that might sound very academic or esoteric. We're going to work on writing a new compliance policy, let's say. That's something that could be the most rote, but okay, but how can we make this a mission-driven, what is the purpose that we can serve? Well, then you start understanding, a compliance policy about doing good business, and you can really extrapolate a larger purpose for why someone would be motivated to participate in something like that. So at the individual team level, understanding the people that work for you, what drives them, helping them extrapolate that purpose directly into the types of work you give them, or the lens that they view it. And then when you have a new project or a new project team coming together, being very purposeful about, we have our KPIs, we have our objectives, but what is our purpose? What is the purpose to which we aspire? And that's where I've told you that I so frequently use that analogy of the the building of the Colosseum, or whatever it is. What is it that you're building? And really get people to put that in their mind's eye. And oftentimes I talk to new leaders and people coming up about this topic. But again, it's very purposeful. You have to do it purposefully, because it's much simpler, easier in the short term to just, you need to work 8 hours, you need to do this, give me your red light, green light, let me know when it's done. But for sustainable business performance and more engaged employees, you have to get to nourishing that purpose.
I just want to take a question from the audience, as we've got some of them flowing in. Yeah, so a question from Susan Y. Says, SAP has been a leader in employment for neurodiverse individuals.
Yes.
And is there still a champion for this program? Does
Yes.
it still exist, or is it becoming institutionalized as part of a broader diversity and inclusion agenda?
Both. Yes, and yes. So we have a formal initiative called Autism at Work. We partner with Ernie Els, who is also he's a professional golfer from Germany. You'll probably know who he is. He is a very big advocate for Autism at Work as well. So via that program, we do some very substantial high-end sponsorship programs to raise money, to raise awareness. We do a big golf tournament that he co-sponsors. So, and I use that as an example to say we have a program whereby we have significant amount of budget allocated to really drive this topic and thought leadership in the industry. We have a named we have an L1 leader, so that would be someone who reports to the executive board, who is a named individual who drives this, and he has tremendous passion for it. So we continue to have it as a program, but we have gotten to the point where it is an ingrained part of our culture as well, because we did it programmatically through targeted recruiting and awareness, because we did very specific things to match job profiles that were well suited to specific types of cognitive diversity. We've now seeded a much more of an engine that's driving itself, because we've got enough high-performing people with different types of neurodiversity operating in multiple functions: business operations, research and development, shared service functions in finance. And so we've got lots of points of light where it's happening within the business. So it's both. We still carry it as a standalone initiative because it still is not at the scale that we would like to see, but it has begun to be a self-fulfilling mechanism because we have enough success stories within, and we learn more and more about, like you match any type of employee profile to a job, where we can see those, the skill sets matching. We're getting much smarter about being able to do good matches between specific types of cognitive diversity and job profiles that will suit them. It's really phenomenal. I would love, just absolutely wonderful and inspirational. We have what we call the Hasso Plattner Award. It's issued once a year for the most, for a really innovative idea or accomplishment. And one of our employees with autism in one of our shared service centers was able to come up with and engineer an AI-driven solution to he had tasks that were being done manually, and he was able to come up with an AI-driven technology which basically obsoleted his task and is on to the next one. So it's a phenomenal initiative for us, and would encourage you, the person asking the question, to look more on SAP's website for some great world-class examples of how to drive that topic.
So in, developing some of these programs and being a champion of, say, neurodiversity, outside of your busy life and home schedule, are you able to connect with other executives and discuss some of these topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, neurodiversity, and what are they saying?
Well, and I will admit that's one of my areas. You always have to have your personal development areas, and one of mine has been to to spend more time networking with colleagues and peers outside of SAP. You guys saw in my joining the board of another company is my I'm really trying to explore that because I really want to understand that a lot more. But because the topic is so much in the public domain now and in the societal consciousness, it's much easier to engage in conversations with people in open ways. So I, in particular, for me, one of the places that I find some of the most useful dialogue is with other women executives in other companies, and have had several occasions to reach out, be it through user groups, customers of SAP, et cetera, to talk about people's experiences and what they're feeling and what they're seeing. And what I find is a much a lot of similar observations about the changes that we're seeing in the workforce. But I also we also do all acknowledge that there is a ways to go, and we also have, as I mentioned, really trying to advance it from just a experiential topic to how can we start to get bodies of data? How can we start to, as I mentioned to you, start working on being able to cite the outcomes, the tangible business outcomes associated with diverse teams. So yes, I seize every chance I can to talk to especially other female executives about the experiences that we've had, especially people in my age. We've seen a lot of change, and we are trying to think a lot about how do we keep from falling back? How do we leave it better for the next generation behind us? And it's a marathon, not a sprint. All of these things, they can never be taken for granted. never be taken for granted. You always have to be purposefully pushing to advance the topics that we've talked about so far. But it's a development area for me when you're super big, is you have to take purposeful time to network outside, and I do have a pretty stretched calendar, so it's something that I've really been trying to do purposefully, because I think that's a super important thing, to not become an echo chamber of our own professional experience.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that question was from Maggie, and we really appreciate your insights in that. So another anonymous question that we have is, what do you think are the biggest hurdles or barriers to developing a more diverse workforce and supportive work culture anchored to values extending beyond performance? And you're clearly making great progress in that, which is incredible to see. But what have also been some of the challenges in that?
Some of the things that I spoke about before that I could bring back to the table. I mean, one is I do think that you do have some, I should say, you have some people who say one thing and, and if not truly internalized it, and they feel like they will toe the, sort of say something publicly and then revert back to their old ways. So to be perfectly frank, I think there's a muscle memory involved here. There's muscle memory where we've done things, we have done things a certain way and had a mindset for so long that either, number one, there's still people who will publicly convey something different than they intend. And then there are what I think is more what I would call muscle memory or unconscious bias. I would say those are the two biggest things. Muscle memory associated with, as I mentioned, you have to be purposeful, because let's say we're under pressure, we're trying to we need to get somebody on board into a role, let's say, for example, and we got to quickly recruit somebody, we need somebody. Just recently, a man who works for me, who's been in the industry for 30 years, said, "Well, that's easy. I'll just call my network, fire up my network, and we'll get somebody." That network is going to yield the 50-year-old Caucasian software background. It's going to be fast. It's going to use the mechanisms you're used to. Your muscle memory is going to take you there. And I remember. But what you really need to do is think about it totally differently. No, that's not the muscle memory. That's not how I'm going to do it. I'm going to, go out and use diverse recruiting methods, places that I can reach populations of people that I haven't before. I'm just going to go about it completely differently. And that there's muscle memory associated with that. I just am used to doing it a certain way. And when the pressure's on and the time is short, my muscle memory takes me to behaving like I used to, and then we're just reinforcing ways of old. And then the second, from that anonymous person who asked, is I think this unconscious bias, where you have to really examine, people are having to really examine, and we've all seen this, unpack that I had bias that I'm not even aware. I'm unconsciously making assumptions, and these are so typical. We still experience, well, a woman would not want this job because she just wouldn't want to be away from her kids that much, or a woman wouldn't want this job because typically that, yes, she won't be able to be the homemaker that she wants to be. People don't realize that they want to promote the advancement of women, but they unconsciously are making assumptions about what women want or don't want, and really have to unpack those, because you've got people who, that you have to be purposeful about that as well. You see that with young people. You see that with various attributes where people have an unconscious bias that they aren't aware of. And last, third thing that, we've hit a lot of stuff where there's also just unconscious bias everywhere, in the ways and recruiting engines and job profiles. I mean, you guys probably in some of your studies, you might see just the way that jobs are written about, job descriptions are posted, the words that are used, the things that are, implied in the, can automatically steer you to screening out or screening in talent that's been pre-sorted without you even realizing it. So SAP has done a lot in this area, and then there's some other technology providers doing a lot here too, from a recruiting and talent acquisition, taking the bias out of the engine that's introduced by the words that you use, the way that you describe attributes for a job. People based on names or interpretations of whether this person is probably male, female, of a certain ethnicity, then people will already jump to conclusions before ever having met the candidate. So there's certain things that that we don't show in those communications. So those, I would say, three things: muscle memory. When pressure's on, I revert to what I know. Unconscious bias, and then things that are engineered into the way that we seek talent and connect people with corporations, that we are seeding out candidates of diverse backgrounds without just automatically, and we're using some technology to interfere.
And so, touching on that unconscious bias, is there any sort of program that SAP has for all employees? I know that you manage, not just United States, but you've also got people across the world. Is this like an international initiative at all? It's more focused US?
That's what yes, it is. Unconscious bias is an area that for SAP, that we, and what do we do? It sounds boring, but we do a lot of different. We've looked into a lot of different. There's lots of different curriculums. We have some immersive experience type curriculums that we have people go through to really acknowledge and help them unpack that. So yes, we do. And I will tell you, that is one thing I do. I mean, usually most of the teams that I work with and for in the past 10 years have been much fewer U.S. Born people than people from all over the world. And it sounds very cliche, but people are people are people are people. And what I find is at least so many of the people that I work with, regardless of whether they're in Japan or Germany or Prague or Canada or Sydney, Australia, really are really being committed, and as we've said, committed to understanding the criticality of this topic for their own sake as well as that of the corporation, and people being purposeful about trying to really unpack what their unconscious bias is.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems like the unconscious bias is not just a United States issue, but maybe different across the board. So is there, any nuances to working with those international teams and how you're approaching these topics, how we might think about it?
Well, let me say this. Here's what I will say more broadly about working with so many people in different countries and different backgrounds. I do think it is really, we do bring different cultural nuances in terms of the way that people communicate. And in particular, SAP is a German company. And I've worked for my boss now was born in Australia. My previous boss, who's the CEO of SAP, was born in German. And when I first started working for him, I totally thought he was going to fire me because his emails were super curt. It was, and I thought, I just must be a total disaster. And then I started to understand, you really did. That's just Germany and US, but communication styles are different. The way people talk, the way people communicate, the directness that they use is different. So when I talk and work with people in Germany, and I'm kind of American nuanced and try to kind of sort of speak in subtleties and use analogies, it's lost on them. They are like, just, cut to the chase, otherwise, and what used to feel, like somebody must be upset with me, I'm now very cognizant they're not upset with me at all. This is how this is just the communication style of their culture. And I underestimated that. I have to say, I underestimated that. I've worked in international business for 30 years, and I've taught classes on, doing business in different countries and what the state. But only in the past, 5 years have I really, really internalized that it is critically important, even in Western cultures that are very similar, to take the time to understand how people might communicate or hear things differently. And take the time to understand that. Because to be effective in working, getting the most out of teams, and I would say also it's sort of a form of bias that you think, and you start forming biases or impressions or assumptions that you're attributing to a person that would be better attributed to the culture in which they were raised, to how they've been. It is so, so, so important. I mean, really embracing that has helped me so much in terms of working with folks who grew up in different backgrounds and different cultures, to take the time to understand that, and do not go with the muscle memory that we're America, we're US, everybody, people will adapt to our communication styles. They are different, and it is important to invest the time to understand that. And it will make, again, it will make, I think, you also, much better performer in your own right, because you'll be better able to understand what it is someone's trying to tell you, what they're trying to say to you, and really digging into that in terms of cultural nuances is critically important.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. It just seems like you've really taken all that, career trajectory of dealing with the uncertainty in your own life, but then also being able to understand how there might even be uncertainty and how we are even understanding each other across the world, across the country. So I really, really do appreciate that insight, and you're in a unique position to be able to, be interacting with people across the board and across the world every day. So
Yes, I feel very, very fortunate in that regard. And every day in the morning I'll wake up and I have 20 meetings on my calendar, but basically every day I have no idea what that day is going to bring. It's and that's the beauty of it.